ये जैसा है वहां भी कहीं पर आता
Afternoon, everyone. We'll get started. Is there anyone who's joining this session for the first time? If yes, please type yes in the chat window. I'm assuming all of you uh, have attended at least one of the sessions before. Is there anyone new? Okay. Ganesh Bhai, welcome. Anyone else besides Ganesh? So just for everyone who've missed one or two sessions before, I'll just quickly do a recap who we are and what we've done in the past. Um, if you can't hear me properly, please do let me know to make sure all of you can hear me properly. So we are the IT wing for Raj Yoga Education Research Foundation. And the purpose of these series of learn, train on sessions, learn on train serve sessions is primarily to make sure that we share our knowledge as a community. We empower each of our community members to make better career choices, thereby bringing peace and happiness in our life. We found that there are various ways we all try to achieve happiness in our life, and sometimes we get lost in it and it becomes very stressful. So we practice a lot of mind techniques to experience happiness without taking and knowing how to handle stress as well. But having the options also gives us a lot of choices in making better decisions. So we've started these series of sessions. They're all free of cost, and our panel members, our committee members, are all experienced professionals, working professionals. So that way, they can share their knowledge. Okay. So we'll start our session today with a quick mind relaxation technique. and Sister Rakhi will share uh, one of the techniques on how to focus better and concentrate. Because we're all learning in these sessions, we want to make sure we don't get distracted and we are focused. Because when we are focused and concentrated, the mind is able to absorb everything that we've learned. So we'll get started with that. So Rakhi, if you can share any technique, that'll be great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our theme for meditation today is power of concentration. In other words, concentration means just focused on one thing. So at this moment and at any time in life, when we set a goal, and just one thing we stay focused on, and every other aspect of life, once this goal is set, every other aspect of life, it fades away. And the only thing that's visible to us and that has occupied our mind space is that goal. So, right now, let's set a goal that I want to focus on just one thing that is the most important for me, one thing that which I have not achieved that keeps bothering me. And that one thing, I will do whatever is in my control by focusing on it so I can reach a stage of achievement. So, goal setting, full focus, and control of attention, and dropping off all the other aspects which are known as distractions when we are trying to focus on one thing. And we can start off by just focusing on our breath right now and observe if our attention is in our control, if our mind is following our instruction to just focus on my breath. So relax and take a deep breath in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. And while this physical activity of breathing in and out, consciously breathing in and out, is happening, observe if the mind is on the breath or somewhere else. If the mind has followed my instruction or it's wandering, just observe. Breathe in. Breathe out. Try to just focus on just the breath and the silence around it. Let all the distractions fade away. Breathe in. Breathe out. And if anything is still pulling the mind, later on after the session, just go deeper within and understand, why is it pulling us? Why is it pulling my mind so much? Why is it distracting me from my current task? Why is it so important for me? Or is it just a random wandering of mind? Or is it something that's strongly pulling my mind? If it's not important, can I drop it and just enjoy the present moment of breathing in, breathing out? Just by observing, understanding the self, on where we place importance where it's not supposed to be placed. Just by observing the mind, we can get ourselves to better attention and concentration. Stand with and just one
We
focus.
can't speak now if we are not. Connected అని వచ్చింది ఏంటో మరి.
So that was the technique for power of concentration. Just focus on one thing. Not forcing the mind, not struggling to do it, but being very easy, being light, and being in the present second moment. And just focusing on one thing, whatever you choose that thing to be. Some people just look at a light, a candle, and just focus on it. Some people don't use any objects, they just silence the mind. The goal setting for them is silence. They practice mindfulness, that is being in the present moment, which is perfect. Just enjoy it. Whatever technique works. Find what works and keep practicing off and on. And you'll feel we are a lot more efficient, a lot more attentive in sessions, a lot more attentive to listening to what others are saying in life. We're not just occupied by our own mind, but we are fully aware and present and plugged in to our existing environment. We are fully cognizant of what's happening around us. We are extremely vigilant in making decisions and actions because of just one aspect of focused mind. So let's take a deep breath, relax, and focus on the session today. Thank you.
Raki. So today we are going to talk about how to read and write from files, and how to load data in an array, and how to handle errors in reading the file or writing the file, or in general, handling errors as exceptions in Python. That will be the goal for today. Let me start sharing the screen. Assume all of you can are able to see my screen. So, quick recap what we've covered so far. We know how to process the data using if and then else loop. What I'll do is, while I'm revising some of these things with you, I'll explain the practical aspect of it, how we would use it in real world, what we've covered, why is it relevant, and how does it work. And as I mentioned before, learning programming, it's very much like learning how to drive a car. If you want to be a car racing driver, you're not going to, and you don't know anything about cars. First thing you'll do is you'll start learning with a very simple car. You'll understand how to use the car. And then once you know how to use the cars, you understand the controls and how to drive safely. Then you will use a racing car and you'll practice on a racing track. So it doesn't look and sound exciting in the first stage, but it is the basics. It's very similar over here as well. You're not going to be an expert programmer from session 3 or 4, but you're learning the basics. And once you learn the basics, then with more practice and more exposure, reading other people's code, doing more programming, you will become an expert programmer. So it's a process. So although it doesn't sound exciting, but as I said, be patient. It takes time. Learning a programming language is very similar to also learning any linguistic language. What you're doing first when you're learning anything is you're just understanding. If you want to write a paragraph, you learn how to write sentences. And if you want to write a sentence, you need to know what are the words and the grammar to connect those words to create a sentence. Pretty much same way when you want to write a data processing application, you want to write some complex functionality to process the data, you have to first understand how to write code. And in order to understand how to program and write code in any programming language, you need to understand the syntax for a particular programming language. In order to understand the syntax of the particular programming language, you have to do very simplistic, very basic assignments to understand how the syntax works. And that's what we are focusing on. It's very important to learn it that way, is because you get a good understanding of the syntax, and then you can always create complex logic using that syntax. Many times what happens is in the universities, they would give you complicated assignment, and the focus is more on the logic rather than understanding the syntax of the programming language. I've gone through personally through that phase where it appears that programming is very difficult. What is difficult is that logic and complex and convoluted logic, not the programming language, but it's not explained in a way where the emphasis is on the syntax of the programming language. So we are going to focus on the syntax, how it is used. And then as you keep programming more and more, it will make more sense. And then you can write complicated programs as well. You can implement complicated logic, because logic is independent of the programming language. So we want to decouple the two to make sure you're not getting confused in the logic, but you're more focused on the syntax of the programming language. So just make sure you're all aware of it. So what we've done so far in the previous 2 sessions, we learned how to use if then else loops. It is very important. It looks very simple and basics. It is very simple. It is important in Python because practically you're going to use if then else loop uh, and for loops for data processing. As I said, Python is the default programming language of choice whenever you're manipulating and playing with data. That data could be coming from a database, the data could be coming from an IT system, the data could be coming from a file, but you're trying to analyze the data in Python. So in order to analyze that data, you have to many times filter the data out of 10 rows, you want to process only 3 rows. Which of those 3 rows you need to process, you will use an if then else rule to figure out which of those rows need to be processed. So that's a simple example of data filtering. There's something called as data transformation, where you have data in a certain format and you're changing that data format. So again, you will use if then else rule and additional complicated logic necessary. But it's very important that you know how for loops work, how if then else loop work. In the calculator assignment, I'm assuming all of you have a good understanding of how while loop works as well. And in the previous session, we covered typecasting, where you have a variable of one type, one data type. You can convert an integer to string and string to integer as well. So we covered all those basics as well. Anyone has any questions or any issues we have? Our instructor from the previous 2 session, Mr. Anurag, he's not able to join today, so I'll be conducting this session. But if you have any specific questions from the previous sessions, please do not hesitate to put them in the WhatsApp group, or if there's anything which you think your question will benefit others, you can post them on the chat window. Otherwise, I'll get started for today's session. It's very important that we revise what we do, so that way you're able to continuously build onto it. Okay, I'm assuming no questions. So today we are going to do file processing. What I mean by that is we are going to create a file and we are going to put some information in the file and we are going to keep on adding more to it. Why this is important and why this is practically used is because to analyze the data, many times we get data in a particular file as well. For example, let's say you're creating your own, you're selling something, and you can manage and keep a track of all your sales information in an Excel file. And then you want to process that data in an Excel file, like what was the maximum sale in which month, or which product was selling the most selling product of all the sales that happened in a month or in a week as well. So if you want to process that data, the first thing you have to do is to be able to read and open that file. Right. So usually you can save Excel files as a CSV file. CSV stands for comma separated value file, right? And in those files, you have a separator. The separator could be a comma. So you can have a comma separated file, you can open it and you can process the data. So what we'll see now is how to open a file, how to read the contents of the file, how to create a new file and write contents to it. And we'll also cover arrays as well. And then we'll give you an assignment to use these concepts. We had made an announcement that, we want you to be able to do these assignments and you can use the WhatsApp group to get help as well. But if you want us to grade the assignment or look at it or provide any comment, we would be glad to do that. The simplest way, what we are thinking is, you can email your Replit username password. That way you don't have to save this code, send it to us, and then we have to load it somewhere and run it as well. So this way it would be easier for you to just share your credentials, keep the password simple, nothing personal. And you can email us your credentials. Please don't put it on WhatsApp group. We don't want everyone to know your username password. So all we want is share it on an email address. I'll post the email address in the chat window. So that way we can basically grade your assignment. But you have to email us and let us know. So the email address is simple and easy to remember. It's learn.on.train.serve@gmail.com. So if you've seen to our website, Inner Technology for You, you'll find the email address over there as well. So we're going to create a sample file, right? So I want you to follow all the steps. Please log into your Replit account. We are going to create a file. Yeah. So I'm going to click over here right? You see the plus over here, right? I want to create a folder, or I can put a file over here and I can call it, demo.txt. I'm going to create a file. This file is going to be empty, right? Okay. So this file is empty. I'm going to just put hello world in it. Okay. Can all of you follow this step? Everyone is able to create a simple dummy file? Great. Okay. Very easy to do that. Now, what we want to do is we just typed hello world in it. You can type anything you want, right? We are going to open this file in Python, and we are going to read the contents and print it on the console, right? So we have the console over here, and we can read whatever is the contents in this file. We want to be able to read it, right? Because if you can read it, then you can process it. So we'll go very simple, right? What we're going to do is, even I sometimes don't remember it. So I'm going to use a cheat sheet. So if you look at this Python tutorial, I'm going to post this link as well. So that way you always have access to the syntax, right? You don't have to memorize it. The way you can remember all the syntax is by just keep on practicing it. So if you go to the w3schools.com, right? So I'm going to use that if I need to use it, but I want to just show you how I think. So that way you can practice some of these yourselves. The more you practice, the better you'll get at it. And any questions you have, we are here, right? So you'll see all the assignments that we've done in the past, the if-else loop. It's explained in very easy to way. While loops, for loops, it's all over here, right? So it's easier for you to revise it. How to read and write files, that's also basics. So you will see how to read and write file. Yeah, so it explains it to you. The simple way to read the file in Python is you have to tell Python, right, where the file is or what the file is, and are you opening the file for reading or writing, right? So two basic things you need to know: where the file is, what is the name of the file, and are you opening that file for reading or writing? And there's existing function in Python called open. So when you're using a function, right, this function open is provided by Python. Okay. So what you do is you have to tell Python, I want you to open a file with a file name, right? And when you're opening that file, you pass the outcome of opening that file into what's called a file handler, right? And you can give the value or that variable to anything that you want, right? So we'll do it. We created a file, right? We are going to create this file, we can say of demo file handler equal to open. Yeah. And we're going to put the file name. So you can put single quote, double quote. We'll put demo.txt. Yeah. And I'm going to open it. For now, I'm opening it for read only, right? And then I'm going to, so file handler is saying, I know this file, right? And I'm going to use this file handler. I'm going to call another function to read the contents of the file. Okay. Then we'll print, yeah, we'll print the content. Which type of file format it can open? That's a good question. So it can open any textual file, or it can. So there are two types of files. You can have textual data in it, like what we've created, demo.txt. There's text in it. And the other type of files is a binary file. What binary file is, for example, an image, a WAV file, an audio file. You don't see, English language characters in it, but you see those weird characters. So that's a binary file. So a text file, it can have any extension, or it can even may not have an extension. You can have a .text extension. You can have a .csv extension for comma separated value, or pretty much any extension. It really doesn't care. It'll still open it. But as long as the information is text, you'll be able to print it and see what it is. Yeah. So okay. So as you can see, what it did was very simple. We opened a file demo.txt. We used Python's function, right? This is provided by Python, open function. I passed in the name of the file, right? And I gave that value, the file handler to it. And then I called another function which says read what's in that file. I stored it in the string variable called content, and then I printed the value of that string variable called content, and it showed on the console, it showed hello world. Very simple, very easy to understand. I won't want you to try, all of you try it. It's only 3 lines, but what you're learning is the syntax to open a file. So can you please try it? Could we use file storage system? Yes, you need to give the path to it. So instead of just giving the name of the file, right, you will give the path to it. Most of the times, it may not find that file on that path if the path is incorrect, or you may not have read or write, you may not have read permissions as well. So those are some of the common errors when you're not able to read the files. If you can please send me the confirmation once you're done typing those 3 lines, so we can continue. Okay, great. Thanks, Tulsi. Okay, awesome. So it's very exciting, right? Now you have the power now to open any type of file, right? It could have, I can dynamically add more content to it, right? Hello world, uh, 1, right? I'm changing the content of the file. I'm going to rerun it, and it's going to show me what's in the file, right? Hello world 1. Okay. So imagine now you can do a lot of fun, exciting things using Python, right? You can also create an image, because an image is type of a file. You can create a PNG image, and you can, put white and black boxes in it. So there's a lot of creative things that you can do. The basics is knowing how to open a file. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So content is a variable, right? I can call anything. You can call it, file content, but make sure then you're putting file content. But that's a variable which is storing the outcome of this read operation, which was done on this file. So whatever the content variable has, we printed it. Okay. So I'll add another line, hello world 2. And now, right, I'm going to rerun it. So the content variable got 2 lines, which I printed on the console. Yeah. Any other questions? Has everyone done these 3 lines? Okay, good. This is how a beginner would start programming, right? many times what happens is we don't want to hard code variables. And what I mean by hard coding is in here, the name of the file, I've actually put the name of the file, right? And many times, we would have a full file path, the location of the file, C:// the folder name. It could be a long path as well. And if you're going to create multiple times, you're going to create a file, then you're going to read it multiple times or so on. Every time you have to put that file name because Python needs to know which file you're opening and for what. So many times what we do, it's a good programming practice. Instead of giving a file name, I will store the variable, the file name in a variable. Yeah. And then if I want to create a file, if I want to write a file, I can do anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say file name equal to the name of the file, and I will pass this file name over here. Do you think this would work and do the same thing? Yes, it'll work exactly the same way. And it's a very common programming practice uh, to not hard code it, because if I'm using this file name 3 different times, then everywhere I have to put demo.txt, demo.txt, demo.txt. And if the name of that path of the file changes anything, I have to go and change it at 3 times. Whereas if I use this variable, I will just change it one over here and everywhere else it will work. Right. So that's called, if you're using the name everywhere, that's called hard coding. Whereas if you assign it to a variable and use the variable name, I'll just change it once over here. Rest, I don't have to change the code. So I'm using a variable or I'm using a configuration instead of hard coding that value. Very simple trick, but we do it all the time. And when we're reviewing the code, by just these simple tricks, we'll come to know whether it's a beginner programmer or it's an expert programmer. So a beginner programmer will hard code everything. A good programmer will use variables instead of hard coding. So it's a practical tip. Okay. So we know how to read a file, right? Now I want to create a new file. Yeah. So I will call, let's say I'll create a file called, demo2. Yeah. And I'm going to open that file, right? Demo2. But instead of reading it, I need to write something in that content. But I need to know what that content is. Yeah. So I will print saying content equal to my content in the file. Yeah, I'm just arbitrarily typing everything. Now, Python, this won't work because we told Python what file it is that we want to open and we want to write in it. But Python doesn't know whether this file is for reading or writing. This file handler doesn't know. Default, it is for reading. But if you want to append or if you want to write to it, you have to tell Python. That is the syntax. Yeah. So reading, you don't have to, but for write, you can. So to make it easier, right, and make it very explicit, whether it's read or write, if you do read over here, perfectly fine. Or you can do write over here as well, saying, I want to open this file for writing. Yeah. And I want to, create a file which would have the name demo.txt, and the content in the file is my content is in the file. Yeah. We'll put this string in the file. Okay. So we'll run it and see what happens. Okay. So what it did was it gave an error. And the reason is because it doesn't know where let me see, my screen is being hidden by this thing. Okay. Let's see, it says content file handler, right? So it's saying, okay. So in the syntax was not correct, right? We are saying right, but we are assigning what it is written, right? So what we need to do, so here it gave me an error on line 5. So if you see line 5 over here, right? I need to say I'm going to write, but I need to tell Python what it is that I'm going to write. So I have to pass this variable. Previously, I was reading it, so I had to assign it to that content variable. Now I'm writing that content into the file. So I need to tell the function what to write. Okay. So let's move it aside. Okay. So it printed on the screen what it is. Yeah. And you'll notice demo.2 didn't exist before. So if I open this file, I should see my content is in the file. Let's open it. Okay, it didn't write anything. Yeah, so we'll see why it didn't do that. Two. Okay. So let's see over here, right? So you'll see we read the file, we write the file. Okay. Here, instead of we get the file, we open the file, we say we have to either append it or we have to write it. We'll say W for writing it. We write the content over here, right? And then that should be it. We can also try closing the file. So a good programming practice is whatever you open, you close it as well. It won't give you an error, but it's just a good programming practice why it should do it. I'm sorry, Sandhya, you saying something? So as you see in this IDE, it's typing it up for me. That's called IntelliSense. That's a functionality which most of the IDEs will offer it for you. Okay. We'll have to see why it's not doing it. Yeah. Okay. Now it is there. Yeah. Maybe sometimes it was a refresh problem, but we created this file and the content is there. And so I want you to try it, right? And it's just 3 lines of code. Instead of putting that file name, I can directly put the file name over here. But we want to not only become a beginner programmer, we want to become a good programmer. So we are going to not hard code it. We're going to put it in a file name variable, right? And we'll create a file which has 1 line of string in it. So can you please try it? Okay, good, Shiva. Everything looks easy so far? What is the significance of W? So this W, right, is telling Python that when it's creating this file, when it's getting this value of this file holder, it has the permissions to make changes to it. It's going to write to it. So to know whether it's writing or appending, right, we have to give this attribute. So that is the syntax. That's how it works. And all programming languages work very similar. Yeah. So if you look at it over here, right, W is for write, A is for append. I won't give an example of append. You can always use yours. Yeah, you can play with it, but you at least you got the basics and you know why reading and writing file is important, because to process the data, you need to read that file. Many times you can get that data from a database, so you should be able to connect to a database and read the data. Probably that would be a little bit advanced, because I'm not sure if all of you know what is the database, how database works. So file is always easy, but the concepts remain the same. Okay. Have all of you typed it as well, besides Shivam? Thank you, Mula. Yeah, SQL is structured query language where you can query a database and process it, and you can process your data using SQL as well. We'll probably try to cover it in towards the end of the class, so it's a little bit advanced, but it is the most common way to process the data. So we'll cover that as well. But now basics, right? We're going to learn how to drive a car, and then we'll go for car racing. Yeah, good. Any questions so far? Okay, great. Now, many times practically, again, by looking at this code, so many times we do what's called as a code review. So we review the code, yeah, especially when a beginner, a new employee is joining, who's a beginner. The common practice in IT is to buddy up. You have a buddy engineer who will review your code, or you will have a team lead or a senior developer who would review your code to make sure you're following the company standards. Company standard could be adding comments to your code. Yeah, it's very important that you start commenting your code. Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to decorate our code with comments. The more comments you have, it shows that you're a good programmer. So I don't want you to just be any programmer. I want you to be the best programmer. And what does a good best programmer does? They will document it. So we're going to do the same thing, right? Now this will be too basic, so you don't have to do it. But what's important is you're getting into the habit of documenting the code. Yeah. So what you're going to say is, open the file, which is saying this is open the file. This is going to. Now, this is two basics, but what is important is the habit of commenting your code. Okay. Now, many times what happen is there could be errors in it. For example, if I give a name of it, demo 3, right? And I want to read the, let's say, I want to, if it's writing it, that's fine. It would write it, but I want to read a file. Yeah. Let me do one thing. I'll keep it this way. I'll create another file and I'll try to read it. You'll see why I'm doing that. So I'm going to read a file and I'll read the same file. Okay. And so we wrote this file, demo1.txt. Yeah. And we are going to read this content, what it is, and we're going to print it on the screen. So in order to avoid the confusion, I'm not going to print it over here. I'll comment that part. Yeah, I don't need it. I'll just take it off. Yeah. So I'll read the content. I'll assign it to this variable before. So whatever you have before, we can reuse that, right? And we will print the content. Yeah, what we did in the first. So what we should expect to look over here, or I can, call it a different variable to make sure, we are not cheating, right? And this content is actually being read from the file and we're not just reprinting what was there in it. So this is the code to read contents of the file. Okay. So what do you think would show up, print on the screen? Okay. So what we are going to do, we wrote this file, we put W on it. We are going to read this file. We explicitly put R, but we didn't have to, but it's a good practice because then that way anyone else can read your code. So a good programmer's code, anyone can easily read it. So what you're doing is you're writing code, but you're also reading it because we've got the contents in it. So whatever is there in this file, right? Which file? The file name is demo.txt. Now I could have hard coded it, but then this way, if I change the file, it's very easy and I can put it over here. So it will print the contents of what's in the file, and the contents in the file is my content is in the file. So let's see if that works. Okay, great, it works. Now I want to change the code. I have this other file which just says hello. right? I want to minimize the changes in the code. So, good programmer, you want to write your program in such a way so as and when there's a change in the requirements of what that program should do, you should be able to do it with minimal changes in the code, right? That's very important. Changes will come. You will be writing code and you'll say, I wrote this, and someone will say, I want you to change it. Now, if you've hard coded everywhere, you'll have to go and change, make a lot of changes. But if you're a smart programmer and you've used variable names, you'll have to change less. So now my requirement is instead of demo1.text, yeah, all I want to do is I want to, do demo2.text. Okay. So what's in demo2.text is this thing in demo, let's say, or I want to say readme.file, readme.text. So I'll just call this readme.text. So now what happens is I didn't have to go and change here and here. Why? Because I used a file variable over here. So I was able to make a change instead of making changes at two places. Because I had used the variable name, I was able to make the change very easily at just one place. Okay. So we'll run this. Okay. And see what happens. Okay. Now, what we did was we are writing in this file. So what was there in the readme.txt file, hello world, we overwrote it over here because when we say W, it's going to overwrite what's in that file. If I had said append, yeah, and I say hello, then it will say my content is in the file and it will add hello to the end of it. And then it will show the different content, right? So this attribute makes a difference over here. And we are going to now change this readme.txt. So I'm going to run it again. Okay. And let's see what's there over here. Okay. And readme.txt. Should have appended it. I'll have to see. Pin will append to the end of the file.
It's
Yeah,
already
you
appended, sir, but I think it's
It's
not in
already
the
there?
new line.
Okay. Oh, yes, right. Thanks for catching that. Yeah. So we ran it thrice. I didn't pay attention. So, because I didn't put the new line. So I was looking here. But yes, it already appended it. Okay. So basics of it. So you printed it over here in the contents, and now you can see it. It's printing it over here. My part of my screen is hidden, so I'm not able to see it. Okay, great. Yeah, it's showing on the console as well. Okay. So very easy to read and write. Okay. Uh, we'll take a 2-minute silence break and we'll see how to handle exceptions in this code. The reason we want to take a silence break is because whatever we learned in this hour, we want to absorb it. Yeah, we don't want to. Our goal is not to say we did 10 things. Our goal is to say we learned, we understood, and we feel confident about 10 things, right? Because the way the mind works, it just listens. The second step of it is it absorbs it. It feels confident that yes, it not only has listened, but it has understood it as well. The more you do it, the better understanding you will have, right? And sometimes just putting a break of 1 or 2 minutes lets you absorb in the mind. So we're just going to take a 2-minute silence break, right? Calm your mind, right? As you saw the technique, concentration and focus. Mind is always wandering. There are thoughts in the mind, right? You're drifting in the past or you're drifting in the future, but stay in the moment. That way, you're not distracted by your own thoughts. Yeah. And experiencing that silence for a minute or two helps you absorb better. Yeah. It helps you refresh what you've done in an hour, and it helps you relax. It doesn't become stressful and a burden on the mind. So you're just going to take a 2-minute silence break, right? If you've not done this assignment, do it. And if you've done it, just relax your mind for 1 or 2 minutes, not too long, but you'll feel light and you'll feel this is more fun. Otherwise, you feel I'm learning so much, I have to do so much, this is stressful. All of those are wasteful thoughts. Don't give room to those thoughts. Just let it go. Yeah. So we'll take 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. So there was a question, how do you create a file? Well, we actually created it. I want you to create it and tell me whether it's successful or not. I want you to put any name of the file, put any content in it. You can write hello to it and see if you're able to create a file. And on you can see on the left-hand side, it will create a file with that name. Yeah, and you can give any extension as well. So can you try that and give me confirmation that you're able to create a new file in Python? Okay, great. Sydney, do you want to give it a try and see if you're able to create a file? Okay, awesome, great. So very simple but powerful exercise, very practical and useful. So we know as a beginner how to write code, but our goal is to become a better programmer, the best programmer. Every good programmer will do what's called as be able to handle errors, right? Because think of it this way. When you're writing code in an organization, usually the thing is I write the code, I will be the only one reading it, and I will be making the changes. That is not true. Someone else would have written the code. You can make modifications to it, and then someone else will make modifications to the code that you write. That's how it practically occurs. So never ever make the assumption, right? You're going to write the code, you're going to maintain it, manage it, and you will be the owner of the code. Never. Imagine this way, right? We work with software systems where there's millions of lines of code. No one person can write millions of lines of code, right? There's a team. So in order to be able to manage that large code base, right? So this is code. We're calling this as code. You break it in different modules, right? Different functionality, and each programmer will manage it, comment it, and then someone else would modify it as well. Now, how do you manage and maintain code which someone else has written? And if there are any errors in it, it's very painful to know where the errors are and what the error is. So a good programmer will always try to write the code in such a way. So if there are any errors, you would know where the error is. Yeah. So we saw previously it was giving an error on line 5, and it was a syntactical error. But there are two types of errors. One is errors when you're writing the code because you didn't indent it properly, and it will give you an error. So your program is not able to successfully run because there were errors at runtime, right? It's you're not able to run it. The second type of errors is your program is able to run, but it didn't successfully finish because there was some error in the processing of that logic, or there was some error when your program actually started running. So you're able to execute the program, but it failed midway because of some error in the logic or something. To be able to handle those type of errors and know where the error occurred, there are two techniques. One is you try to write the code so that you can catch those errors. And the second technique is you can put breakpoints in your code so you know at least which part of your program is working fine. Yeah. So adding breakpoints is very easy. Every IDE, IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. Replit is an example of an integrated development environment, IDE. Yeah. If you're using Visual Studio, if you're using PyCharm, if you're using any IDE of your choice, all the IDEs will give you an option of adding a breakpoint. And what is a breakpoint? It is the point in your code where it's going to stop execution and break over there. So that's why we call it as a breakpoint. Yeah. So you'll see it says breakpoint, toggle breakpoint. I'm going to put a breakpoint over here. And you see it puts a blue dot over here. Different IDs will have different instances, but in this case, it put a blue dot over here. So I've put a breakpoint. What it means is my program will stop over here. So if there any error occurred before that, it will stop even before that. It won't even reach to that blue dot because the program errored out before. Yeah. So this is like way too early. So I will remove the toggle point and I'll probably put it over here. Okay. So I want a breakpoint at on line number 11, and I'll put a breakpoint over here. See, toggle breakpoint. Is everyone able to put a breakpoint? So this way, you're running the program all the way. When I hit run, my program is going to do everything until it stops at line number 12, because we put a breakpoint over there. We put a break in the execution of this program, right? This main.python file is going to do everything until line 12 because I have a breakpoint over there. It's going to stop over there. If it didn't give any error until here, which means my program was able to successfully run over here. But if there was any error, then it won't even reach to this breakpoint. So I know that there's a problem with my code over here. So if you have millions of lines of code, and if I put a breakpoint on line number, let's say 400,000, and it's still errored out, I know, my program is failing somewhere maybe at 100,000th line. So I'll put a breakpoint earlier or where the logical error is. So it's very important to be able to know what a breakpoint is and how to use breakpoint. So let's try running it. So you'll be able to see what it is, and usually there will be variables you can see as well. Okay. So now what it's doing is it printed it hello, I think, as well. Okay. But another way to catch errors is doing what's called as try exception. Okay. So if you go back on W3C and you'll see it's a very simple syntax, try except. All it says is whatever code you have within try, it will work. And if there's any error, it will print whatever is in the except block. So try and except, that is the syntax, right? We'll actually see how to practically use try and except in the files that the file reading output. So this is syntax, try, except, very simple. We're going to apply it in this file reading example, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say try, I'm going to do all of this. I'm going to try all of this. Yeah. And accept. Okay. Now, I'm saying accept, right? As exception key. Okay. So you'll see, right? It will say try. You'll see it says try exception as E, right? And then we'll be able to just type that. You also string concatenation. Yeah. So you know what I'm doing. So whatever the error is, if there is any error, right, it will go in this except, right? I need to indent the code because it's not well indented. I think we need more indentation. So it's always good to just start with try so you don't have to do the indentation again, but we wanted to learn from the basics, go step by step. So we'll add the indentation. Okay. What we'll do is exception as E. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We'll try to run this. there was no error in the code, so nothing happened. But if I give a file name which doesn't exist, right? And here I'm trying to, let's say, I will try to read this file. Okay, I'll do the same thing for over here. And I'll just put the same send, cut and paste. There's only one change. What I'll do is this file name, I will give a name of the file which doesn't exist. Okay. I don't have any file with this name. So what is going to happen is it's trying to read a file with this file name which doesn't exist. So it won't even go over here. Yeah. If I didn't put try and accept over here, it will throw me an error. Okay. Let's see what that error is if I don't do that. So I'm going to comment out the try accept. I'm going to run this and see what happens. Okay, I did get an error, and the error is the file indentation. Okay, that's fine. I'll indent it again. Okay, so it gave an error, no such file, right? So it gave an error, file not found error. Yeah. Now, if I had, instead of giving this specific error, file not found, no such file or directory, temp1.txt, I want to, print this error. This is an exception that occurred, and it tells me what it is. That I will be able to do that with the try catch. Because many times what happens is these errors are so cryptic and it doesn't really tell you what happened, right? So it's always better that you are catching those. So the terminology is you have a try and a catch, right? Or a try and accept block where whatever errors are thrown in, you're catching for it. Okay. So let's see now what happens. Okay. Now, instead of saying what it is, I put this, it went into this line of the code because this file didn't exist, right? So now I can say this is my custom error, right? I can put whatever I want. So I can gracefully handle the errors and I'm in more control of how these error is displayed. Okay. Now you might wonder, that's silly. Why does it matter? It's a very simple thing, but it matters a lot. A good example is many times, on websites, when you see those forms and so on, the hackers, they will try to put garbage information. And the code is not well written to handle the try and catch catch these exceptions. And then it will give you the default error. And in that default error, whatever is printed, it will tell you which version of the web server it is, whether it's Linux operating system or Windows. It will give you that information. That information is very valuable for hackers because they know how to exploit that vulnerability, if it's Linux, if it's Windows, and they can hack into the system. So it's always a good practice that you put try and accept. By looking at try and expert, you've upgraded yourself from a beginner to an intermediate, from a okay programmer to a good programmer, because you are in control of how you want the errors to be handled and what message you want to give when this program is running. Otherwise, it will give the default errors. So this way you are in control. So it's always a good programming practice. Get into these practices in the beginning stages itself, commenting your code, not hard coding variables, and using try except. The sooner you get into the habit of doing it, it will just show that you're a good programmer. It will help you catch the errors as and when those errors occur as well. Okay. Any questions so far? So yes, E is a user-defined variable. Yeah, we defined it. Instead of E, I can call it E2. Yeah, and there I'll have to say E2. Yeah, I'm going to run it again. Same thing. Yeah, Urmila, we can always cut and paste the code, but you will best benefit from typing it yourself. I myself do the same thing. So if you can see, right, before the lab, I practice it myself. I could have cut and pasted it, put everything over there, but I also didn't do that because when you actually do it, you run across these errors, you run into these indentation problems, and especially for a beginner, right? When you're learning how to walk, it's important that you walk a lot so then you can run. It's always easy to cut paste, but we're intentionally not pasting the code. So each of you actually type it. So please don't paste the code. To do it yourself because that way you'll benefit the most and you'll learn a lot. Okay? Any other questions?
Oh, thank you, Nitish bhai.
Yes.
This try and accept, can't it be automatically after maybe 10, 12 lines, it automatically keeps getting into the system?
So see, because you can control it, right? What if there are 3 errors? Right, then you're relying on the Python interpreter to give that error, and that error may not always be meaningful, right? So we want to be able to control the error. For example, and this happens many times, right? You're filling out a form for, paying a light bill or something, and it gives you a very weird error. It says, um, not able to submit your application. That error is so cryptic, you really don't know what happened, right? And when you call them, you'll say, I had an error. They'll say, did you get an error number or did it give it something, right? And you're not able to even tell them where it errored out and what it is, right? So imagine, you're building a system where there are, 3 lakh transactions and only 1% failed. And yours was one of the 300. Which one was it, why it failed, and where it failed? It becomes very tricky. So instead of relying on Python to throw that error, many times what we do is a good common practice is you log those errors. And what I mean by logging that error is you write this error instead of the console, you will write it actually in the log file. So someone can go and take a look at it. So when you're writing in the log file, you need to know exactly which customer, what time, and where exactly it failed so you can help and do something about it. So we don't want to leave it as a default. We want to be able to control it, have the control. So we want to know which customer ID, which file it failed, what time it failed, right? And more details around it. So corrective action can be taken. So that's why it's a common practice. We put it in try and accept. And usually what happens, there are different types of exception or different types of errors. One of the exception is the generic one, but there can be other types of exception, IO error or so on. And you can specifically catch multiple types of exception, right? By just adding except. So it gives you full control as to what are the different types of exceptions that you want to capture. And you can, put it that way. So I'll use my cheat sheet, right? And see what it was that I played with. Okay, so you can see, what was it? IO error. Yeah, file not found error. I can give file not found error. I can give IO error. Yeah, so you can give multiple errors. This code will also work. Yeah. So you can catch multiple types of exceptions which occur. So if I know this was an IO error, IO means input output error, that it was not able to, read or write to the file because you had a permission issue, then it will throw that specific error. So I, as a programmer, based on the design specifications, I can control and see what errors should be displayed to the user. Did I answer your question, Ganesh?
Yes, Baji. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. There's one last thing I will cover for today, and then we will go for the assignment for today. So we know how to read, open a file, write a file, read the contents of the file, append to it, create a new file, and how to handle exceptions in the code. Yeah. So the next thing we are going to do is how to store, how to use arrays. Uh, I didn't attend each and every minute of the previous 3 sessions, although I did most of it. So if you've already done arrays, I don't want to repeat it. But does all of you know what is an array and how to create an array in Python? Is everyone familiar with it, or I can cover it quickly in 5 minutes? Okay. So I'm assuming array is not covered, right?
Please cover it.
Okay. So an array is a variable type in which you can store multiple values, right? So what we do is, right, I can say my array, and in this variable, I can create multiple variables, right? I can say, I can put a car name, right? BMW. Whatever the name is, I don't know the spelling. Keep it simple, yeah. So this array, I've created 2 elements. I'll create another one as well. So this is an array which has 3 elements in it, or 3 variables that are stored into my array. Okay, yeah, scroll it, sorry. So this is an array. Okay. Why we are covering this in today's session is because many times what would happen is the contents of your file, right? You would have to read the contents of the file in an array. So your assignment, your homework assignment is you're going to create a file in which you're going to store some sales transactions, right? You're going to have a sales transaction ID, a sales ID, right? So we know which transaction it was, right? Transaction amount. And you can put, let's say, a name. Okay. So I'm going to have a flat file, which was going to have 3 types of data in it. It's going to have a sales ID, a transaction amount, and a name. Yeah. What your homework is, you have to read the contents of the file. Yeah. And you need to only print or calculate all the sales transactions which were more than 100, and what was the total count of the sales, but each sales transaction should be more than 100, right? So this is another ID, but in this one the amount is 34, right? And doesn't matter. I'll put another one, 125. The amount would be 102. Yeah. So name, you're going to ignore it, but you need to be able to filter it, because in the future assignment, I can use that name and say, show me all the transactions that occurred for Mukesh. Yeah. So then I need to be able to count that as well. So how you store it, we never know. So this is a sample file that we created. The assignment is calculate the total transaction amount, right? But calculate only the total, the sum of the transaction amount, if the transaction amount was more than 100. So the answer would be you need to add 102 and you need to add this amount. That should be the answer. But you have to do this in Python, and Python should do that calculation and tell you what the answer is. Is the assignment clear what it is that we need to do? You can create this file, right? And essentially, I'm just creating this random assignment so you know how to read a file. You know how to read the information from that file, right? And then be able to use this variable, the transaction amount, filter the condition if the amount is more than 100, then only you keep adding it in a for loop.
I write /n in the write function, will it count it as a new line?
Yes, it will. Yeah, we can try it right now, actually.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. You can just, put a new line over here as well and try it out. Yeah, just play with it. You'll have a lot of fun playing with it. But this is the assignment, right? In order to do this assignment, you need to store this line in an array variable. Okay, so in addition to doing a read over here, right? When you're reading a file, yeah, let's see over here, when you're reading a file, where is it? Yeah, you read. You can also read each and every line, and instead of saying read, you can do a read line. Okay, so that way it is. So the purpose of the assignment is for you to learn a little bit on yourself, right? And build on to the basic knowledge that you got. And the more syntax you have, the better it is. So I've given you all the hints. Instead of read, you'll have to use read line. Yeah. And you'll have to use array, right? And using array is very simple, basics. So what we'll do is we'll print is my array. Okay. And here it'll give me that error, right? And it won't reach over here. So now I'm going to revert back to the file name that we know it works. We'll call it demo.txt. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So we didn't have any errors, and we said print the contents of the my array. So array is nothing but a variable. This is the name of the variable. The variable is of type array, right? If I say, sales amount. Yeah. So in this case, my sales amount is a variable having the value type 5, which is of type integer, right? So this variable is holding a value which is a type integer. So this variable called my array is holding a value of type strings in it, but it's holding it in this array of variables. So this is an array. So I can print it. And every time you have an array, you have what's called as indexes. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2. And what's interesting in Python is it's circular, right? So if I say this is index 0, always remember, this is in Python. Some programming language will take the first element as index 1. Some take it as index 0. So Java, C, C++, they all take it as index 0. MATLAB takes it as 1, but Python takes it as 0 as well, which is the most common way. So if I want to just print the value BMW, right, and notice the syntax square bracket, and I say 0, what do you think it will print in the my array? Which value would it print? Any guess?
Sir, BMW?
BMW, because that's the 0 index. Yeah. So let's see if it does it. Okay, it did print BMW. If I say 1, which value would it print?
KIA?
Yeah, it will print Kia. And if I say 2, it will print Maruti. Yeah.
Maruti.
You can pick and choose which index variable you want. So in your assignment, you need to pick and choose the sales transaction. So then that way you can put the if condition. Yeah. Now what's interesting is if this is 0, what would be minus 1? Maruti, because it's circular, right? That's how Python takes it. So it will print Maruti. That's right. Yeah. If I say minus 2, do you know what would it print? It will print Kia. Yeah. So just play with it. Have fun, right? What's interesting is if I put 4, does index 4 exist?
BMW.
No, it doesn't exist, right? Because it's only 0, 1, 2, and there's no 4, right? So it'll give you index out of the range. So now it throw an error. So I'm going to be a good programmer. I'm going to say try. Yeah. And I'm going to catch that exception. and see if I can control and define what it happens if it is giving an error which I want to have control over. Instead of E2, it's just better to call it S. So now this is my customer index description. Let's see what happens. Okay, so it says index out of range, right? So you'll see what try except does it, how to print arrays, right? And if I put 0, it won't print anything because it's a valid value. So it will print actually BMW then. Okay, -2, yeah, we can put -2. So this is 0. It's going to go back. This will be -1. This will be -2. So -2 would be Kia. So it's a circular loop kind of, right? This is 0, this is 1, this is 2, but there's no 3 and 4. So that will be out of the range. But this is 0. It takes, right, the last one, right, as -1, right? And then it goes -2, -3, right? It'll kind of goes that way. So think of it this way. This is like, you're connecting it to the back. Usually I don't use it because it's very confusing, right? But it's just good to know. It's just sometimes you just have to play with it to have fun and have more control over the syntax of the language, what it does. So whatever you do, have fun, enjoy, don't restrict yourself, play with it. It's like, you have a car. The more you play with the car, you know what the controls are. What does this button do? What it happens? So familiarize yourself with the syntax, right? The more you know with the syntax, the more sentences you can write. The more sentences you can write an essay. You can become Shakespeare, right? But it all starts with the basics. Get familiar with the syntax. So in this case, there's no sales amount. That's your assignment, right? So in your assignment, what you have to do is you have to create a file, right, in which you're going to create a sales ID. Where's my file? Yeah. Oh, where's my file? Yeah. So you're going to create sales. You're going to create three values in it: sales ID, transaction amount, and a name. You have to store this variable. You do a read line, store each of these lines into an array, read the first index because this would be index 0. This would be the first index. Use this value, but then you have to use an if condition because this sales amount is less than 100. And then you can add and keep on adding the sales transaction value for all the transactions which were more than 100. Each transaction was more than 100. Yeah. It many times happens when you're. That's why I didn't cover delete, but you can delete files in. You can write code to delete it. That's what the hackers would do, right? They want to create damage, but I'm not intentionally showing you how to delete it because it can do substantial damage, right? So, and especially if you're working in the banking sector, if you try to delete something, it would raise a red flag because you could be trying to hide some activity. So anything you have to delete, you have to get permission and you have to log a ticket as to why we deleted it. So that's why I'm not teaching you how to delete it, but you can certainly play with it, but you have to be very careful what you're deleting it and so on. But the syntax is there, right? Instead of saying open, you're just going to say remove, but it's there. But we are focused more on the read and write, which is more practical. Okay. That's all I had for today. I hope you enjoyed today's session. You learned how to read write files, how to do try and exception errors as well, how to customize the errors, how to store variables in an array format, and build onto the previous logic that you learned with if else logic and build it on further. Any questions? Otherwise, we'll quickly share another mind relaxation technique. Which is your recommended ID except Replit? It's depends on the preference, and it also depends like which company you're working for. So it varies from organization to organization. Practically, most of the time, we use what's called as a notebook. uh, there's Jupyter Notebook. So when you're downloading, I use Anaconda, and if you use Anaconda, it comes with Jupyter Notebooks. So it's very easy to program and debug it that way. For those who are on Mac, a lot of people they use PyCharm. But it depends. It's very varied. Nothing. For those who are working in .NET, you can use Visual Studio. So it depends on the organization preference as well, because these IDs are expensive. Visual Studio is not free. Uh, and if you're buying a licensed version, they can be expensive. So organizations will tell you what it is, but the basics are the same. You can always set up a breakpoint. You can see the call stack variables. Today we didn't do much about the breakpoints and the handling, but there's a lot more to it. But I just want you to get familiar with the terms. What is a breakpoint, right? And play with it. But if time permits, we'll do a dedicated session on how to look at a call stack. What is a call stack? How to debug your code, and it could be very complex. And debugging is an art. A good programmer would be able to debug within few minutes. Debugging, finding a fault in a million line of code can be very tricky. But if you've got good debugging skills, you can do it very quickly. Okay. When to use curly braces? Well, depends, right? If you're writing code in which if we use it many time in functions as well, and there'll be a lot of instances. So we'll cover it in one of the sessions when there's a need for it.
I think so. They are used when we are dealing with JSON.
So JSON is a file format, right? That is so instead of a CSV, if you're using a JSON, that file specification would have the curly braces in it. But I thought we were saying when to use curly braces in a Python code. So that depends, which function or how you're writing it. But yes, if you're using JSON, then JSON is JavaScript object notification. It's a type of a file format. What we are covering over here is this is a CSV or a flat file, no curly braces in it, nothing. And the delimiter is the comma. So this is a CSV file. It can have an extension .text, but in IT terminology, we call this type of a file as a flat file. The structure is flat. It's not nested like in a JSON, right? It's not hierarchical in any way. But yes, there's another file format which use XML, where you have what's called as you have those less than, greater than signs. Those are called as tags or hyper tags. But if need be, we'll cover that in the session. But start with basics. Know how to process a flat file. For those who are very eager and enthusiastic, just Google for it how to read a JSON file or an XML file in Python. You can certainly do that as well. Okay, what is API? API is a very most popular way of exposing your code as functionality. The best way to remember and understand API is if you go to yatra.com or makemytrip.com, you're saying, I want to go from point A to point B. Give me all the flights available. And it's showing you all the flights from different airlines. How does it do it? Right? The way it does it is each of the airlines is exposing its functionality or availability of what flights it has from that point A to point B. It's exposing that functionality, that data, as an API, application programming interface. It's nothing but a real-time interface to interact with that airline system to get you the information you want. In this case, I would be making a call saying get reservation or get schedule information from point A, airport code A, to airport B for this date, right? And it will give me all the available slots with the prices. So I'm interacting with each of the airlines backend IT system where it has all that data using an API where it is real-time information, right? And it's in a secured way. No one else can call Air India's or Indigo's API. You have to first sign up for it, and then you can make that API call. So it's a secured way of exchanging information in real time. And APIs are the most common way of having system to system interaction internally within the company and externally with the partners. Yeah. Uh, Harry part, yeah. So what I would suggest, Sachin, is play with it. It's very simple, right? You're storing multiple values in a variable called array, right? And this is a one-dimensional array. So I have multiple values. In this case, for example, I just stored 3 variables, but there's no limit to it. I can store 1,000 as well, right? Because when you're doing data analysis, for simplicity, we created a simple file which has 3 values, but it can have 10 values. It can have 1,000 values as well, right? So how do you store variables, large number of variables, and keep it together? Because in this case, right, the best example is, right, you've got these sales transactions, right? Where did my file go? So file. Yeah, so you can see there's only 3 lines, right? But there are only 3 columns over here. So this is a row, right? And this is a column. Column 0, column 1, column 2. And I want to be able to process that data, right? So each of these rows, we store it in an array. And if it had 1,000 variables, we could. But if each of the row has 1,000 variables, right? How do you store the data in such a way so that you can process it? An array is a type of a data structure. It allows you to store or structure your data in a variable that is easy to manipulate, is easy to process it. So once I load this data in array, I can pick and choose. I can say, okay, if my array bracket 1 value is greater than 100, then do something. Yeah, I can keep on adding it in a variable. So it gives you the flexibility to process your data by storing in that variable with the data structure of type array. Okay, is it clear, Sachin? Okay, great. Please do give feedback because the instructor for today was new to you. So any suggestions you have, you can share it in that feedback form. Otherwise, we'll have Raki share a mind relaxation technique. Thank you.
Evening, everyone. A quick, short relaxation before we end the session. The theme for meditation is self-esteem. Believing in the self. And the starting point is the thoughts, the quality of the thought we hold for ourselves. So if I want to be a successful Python programmer and land a job, then I have to fine tune the quality of my thought and erase thoughts of nervousness, thoughts of I'm not sure if I can do it or not, which is doubt, thoughts of lack of confidence. Erasing all of these, rising above these low vibes, and holding one thought: I am successful. Just one thought, and feeling that high energy of this one thought. I am successful. No matter what, I am successful. And success is not defined by tangible achievements, by outer achievements. Success is defined by our positive outlook, our positive perspective in any outer challenge, situation, failure, in any negative aspect that we are forced to face. We may be forced to face our own negative mind, but success is in raising our low vibrational energy of negative thoughts, thoughts of disbelief in our capabilities, thoughts of disbelief in future, thoughts of anxiety. This is all low vibrational energy. Success means rising above all of this. So I am successful is one powerful thought we hold in our minds. And march forward with confidence and belief in ourselves. That even if I fall, even if I fail, I will rise up much more stronger, much more enabled, much more capable in the next step forward. Because I learned how to pick myself up from a fall. That's a very valuable experience. That is success. How I rise above failures and my negative mindset, that is success. So whenever we find ourselves feeling very low, feeling negative, not feeling good, let's anchor ourselves in one powerful opposite energy thought. Exactly the opposite energy of what is required at that moment. For example, if I'm nervous, I have to hold on the thought that I am confident. I just have to say, I am confident. So the negative energy is gradually transforming into positive energy. If I'm worried, the opposite thought is being carefree. If I'm stressed, the opposite thought is I'm relaxed. The moment stress fills up in my mind, I am just going to have one thought injected into my mind. I'm relaxed. 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 So using this very powerful tool of transforming negative thoughts to positive thoughts is success. Success over our mind. success over outer situations, success over challenges. So let's move forward in the coming week and put this technique to practice. And let's take one assignment for the mind. How long it took for us to get ourselves out of a negative feeling and stabilize in a powerful positive feeling by taking an opposite thought of equal energy. Let's assess our mind and give it a grade. If I'm nervous, can I take a thought of being confident and start feeling confident in a matter of few minutes? Then I have a grade A. And all it takes for me is just to be very sharp and attentive on how I'm feeling, and quickly changing that feeling by taking a different thought. Very simple technique. So let's practice this and come back next week and share our experiences. Because it's not just about learning Python. It's also learning how a Python quote unquote snake related negative energies that are harboring in our mind. How are we empowered to remove them and discard them? This is inner enablement. So let's move forward with this technique and have a great weekend ahead. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, everyone.